it's important to remember that the American Revolution wasn't just being fought on land. It wasn't just being fought between the Redcoats and the Continentals in North America, but you also have to take into account battles and expeditions and things that were going on the seafront. So in this section, we're looking at both the land frontier and the sea frontier. Now, 1777 came to be known as the Bloody Year on the frontier. Indians went on a scalping spree. Now, scalping is exactly what you think it is. It was the actual removal of the hair and the skin off the top of the head. It was a way to prove that an enemy had been defeated, had been killed in battle. And on the frontier, people were going to suffer a great deal during this time frame. Now, the thing is, a majority of the Indians, most of the Indians, supported the British. They believed that if the British won, then that would stop American expansion west and save Indian land. Because you got to take into account, you had the Proclamation Line of 1763, which was supposed to stop anything past the Alleghenies, and all of that land of the Ohio country was supposed to be left for the Indians. Okay, that had been the plan of the Crown. The fact that Americans were going past that line made a great number of the Indians believe that they had a better bet siding with Britain. That Britain was the one that had already set up the rules for how they were going to maintain that land for the Indians, and maybe that would work out best for them. Okay. Now, this wasn't to say that all the Indian tribes sided with the British, but it was a majority. Now, you had Mohawk chief Joseph Brant. He had recently converted to Anglicanism. Okay, now you can think about it in terms of he had become a Christian, and what's more, he was an Anglican, which you can think in terms of the Church of England. Okay, his men ravaged the back country of Pennsylvania and New York. Think about it. Upstate New York, western Pennsylvania, places like that, things that we don't think about as being on the frontier, on the very edge of everything. That was the Wild West at this point in time. And Chief Joseph Brant's men went on a rampage. It wasn't until 1779 that the Americans were able to get the upper hand and essentially stop a lot of the killing that had been going on. Now, this is not to say that only the Indians were committing any kind of crimes at this point in time. Please don't take it that way. There was plenty of guilt to go on both sides. But it was a period of time where those living on the frontier really felt that they were living through the bloody years. With all of that, 1784, the pro-British Iroquois, okay, these were the Oneidas and the Tuscaroras, they had sided with the Americans, okay, some of the Iroquois Confederacy. Other four went with the British. So while I have mentioned previously that this was a civil war amongst the colonists, there was also the equivalent of a civil war going on amongst the Iroquois. Not all of them stood together. Okay, now, excuse me, those who had gone through and sided with the U.S. had signed the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. Okay, this was the very first time that there would be any kind of treaty between the U.S. and one of the Indian nations. Now, you're going to see as we progress that there were a lot of treaties signed, many in good faith, many in less than good faith. A lot of times things would be broken. It was, however, here that we had the first chance to actually see how the U.S. later on would look at dealing with the various Indian nations. And quite literally, the plan had been for the U.S. and the various Indian nations to deal with one another as you would separate countries. Okay, so you have the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. This is the very first one. And it was under these terms that the Indians ceded most of their land. This is going to become a sort of recurring theme. You're going to see a great number of treaties over the course of time from this point through the 1800s, where you're going to find a number of Native American tribes giving up the land that they controlled. Now, in some respects, certain instances, this was being done to try to keep the peace or to try and make sure that they were going to be protected or things along those lines. But this is going to set the precedent. This was the first time that you had a treaty between the United States and an Indian nation where they were actually giving up some of their land. The interesting thing about sort of the American idea dealing with land at this point in time is that even though we're in the midst of a revolution, we're in the midst of a war, you still have pioneers pushing west, okay? Now, as they did so at this time, remember we talked before about the Coureur de Bois and some of the different places that they named? Well, these pioneers, as they're heading west in the midst of a revolution, they showed gratitude to the French. Okay, they gave towns names such as Louisville, while remembering the Revolution with Lexington, Kentucky. So even while the fighting is still going on, you have people moving west and they're naming these various towns in memory of like the first battle, or they're naming things in gratitude to what France has done to assist us. But it's that idea that there's going to be a continuous push forward. There is always going to be that desire amongst the American people to keep pushing forward, to keep moving west, and they would do so. George Rogers Clark, this was referred to, you can see, as an audacious frontiersman. He floated down the Ohio River with about 175 men. Okay, now this was in 1778, 1779. And with this relatively small number, he was able to go through and capture the forts at Kaskaskia, Cahokia, and Vincennes. So you think about it. I mean, you're talking less than 200 people, 200 guys. They are floating. They've gone down the Ohio. They're out in the middle of, not exactly friendly territory, and yet they're able to go through and continue capturing land. Okay, this is going to be an ongoing issue, okay? You have the fact that you've got guys like George Rogers Clark out there really not under the command of any particular aspect of the Continental Congress, as you can see, but still going through and fighting, trying to continue the revolution. And this is going to be something that, we see more and more. As I said, you do have to look at the sea. Now, if you keep in mind the navies at the time, you saw on the video for America's Story of Us the size of the Royal Navy, okay, the ships of the line. We had nothing comparable to that. Okay, we had a very tiny American Navy, mostly privateers, where you got a letter of permission from the government and you could then go forth and basically be a legal pirate. But we didn't really destroy British merchant shipping, and we really did our best to do what we could and carry the war into the waters around the British Isles. We did have some different ships that we got from France, for example, but generally speaking, we were not going to be a massive force to equal the Royal Navy. As I said, swift privateers preyed on enemy shipping, capturing many ships and forcing them to sail in convoys. So you're starting to see the need for defense. Now, convoys, that's going to become more important later on, especially World War I and World War II. But you keep in mind, you think about what a pirate would do. Okay, pirate will go out, they will capture various ships and whatnot to try and collect whatever goods that ship might have on it. Same kind of thing here in war, except in this case, they're not pirates, they're privateers. And this had a noticeable effect in regards to the war at sea, even though we weren't going to be able to, run around the British Navy and just do whatever we wanted, but we were going to have an effect. This was going to continue on throughout the war. We were going to keep up hit and run tactics on the British Navy the same way that we were trying to do in regards to land. We were essentially fighting a guerrilla war, but in this case, at sea.